Welcome to the Art of the Game podcast. We are back for season 2. I'm Cass, and here for the ride are my co-hosts and co-founders, Reese and Ryan.
We started this podcast off the back of our business, Sport Design Australia, with the purpose of exploring the intersection of the sporting and creative industries. We wanted to bring you the biggest names in sports design and content excellence.
Our guests this season are providing us with perspectives from all across the world, giving us insight into the artistry behind content and how it influences every aspect of the game. Whether you are a sports enthusiast, a designer, or a creator, Art of the Game will have something for you.
All right, guys, we're back with another episode of the Art of the Game podcast, and we're excited to welcome our next guest. He joined us all the way from the state of Ohio in the USA, someone who we've been intrigued by creatively, and we've been following his work across sports for some time now. We're really excited about this one. We know there's going to be plenty to take away. And so without further ado, welcome to the Art of the Game podcast, Greg Walter. Thanks for joining us, mate.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate you guys taking the time. Looking forward to talking to y'all.
Yeah, no, we appreciate you as well. And we've obviously had a few hiccups getting to this point of recording, but we're super excited that you're able to join us, and know it's the evening over there, so we won't take too much of your time. But yeah, we thought we'd kick things off. Who's Greg Walter and what are you all about?
So I've been doing animation in the industry for about 25 years. For a long time before we started doing work in sports and before I started Too Tall, I was working in kids media for a really long time. Moved out from Seattle, where we live, to Ohio with my family and started my own business, and was able to hire Ian Mork, who I worked with for 10 years in Seattle, to be my partner in the business, and have been doing Too Tall ever since. About 6 years ago, we made a hard turn from kids media and branding into sports and never really looked back. We've just been doing almost entirely sports ever since. Probably about 90% of our work is done in sports these days.
Yeah, nice. And talk to us about that pivot. What was it that made you go, we need to go out of kids media and into sport?
Yeah, basically money. We tried for years to make a go of it in kids media, and we found the budgets just weren't there for us to grow as artists and storytellers. We really wanted to continue to get better at what we did, but we found the budgets were there for more for longer content, not for higher quality content. And so at a certain point, we just decided we needed to go into an area that was a lot more adventurous, an area that had more of a thirst for innovative, cool content, so that we could continue bringing in enough money for us to continue innovating and getting better at our craft. And It looked like sports would be a really fertile market, partially because there weren't a whole lot of players doing what we did in the space at the time. And also, there's a constant need for getting fans hyped again in new and different ways. And within apparel brands and in teams and in networks and everything, they're constantly trying new stuff. And we thought that would be a really great space for us to get involved in.
Yeah, I love that. And from a personal perspective, what are your interests in sport? Are you big into any particular sports, any particular teams?
Yeah, I'm a Seattle guy. So I'm a Seahawks fan. I'm a Sounders fan. I don't really watch baseball, and we don't have an NBA team, but that's where my heart lies, is in all Seattle sports. The funny thing, though, is before going into sports as a career, I didn't actually watch that much sports. I didn't come to this as a diehard sports fan. I kind of learned. I love sports now because I'm living and breathing it every day. But when I looked inside it, what I saw was just an amazing storytelling space. And I was already a Seahawks fan. I was already a Sounders fan. But beyond that, I had never really watched any hoops, anything like that. So kind of came to it late in the game a little bit.
Okay. Have you had the opportunity to work with any of those Seattle teams?
Yes, we've worked our very first project. Actually, the first project that made us think, maybe sports would be a cool space to go into was a job we did with the Sounders in 2018, maybe. And we were right in the middle of producing a series for Sesame Street and doing all the kids media stuff. And we did this one project for the Sounders that kind of came just through Ian, my partner's Instagram. He'd been doing some drawings of the players. They got in touch with him and said, hey, we want an animation. He was like, hey, let's do an animation. we did it and we were like, this is actually a lot of fun. And I think we could do more of this. So that was our very first peek into the sports space. Since then, we've also worked with the Seahawks.
Yeah, I love that. That's so cool. And I think it's a really good story about like creatives, whether you're starting out or whether you've been in the game for a while, the power of showcasing your work, whether it's just, passion projects that you're putting up on your Instagram or your Behance or wherever you kind of showcase your work, but making sure that if you are a creative, that you're showcasing some of that work, because more often than not, someone's going to see it or someone will see it and then pass it on to someone who makes a decision. And before you know it, you're working with a brand that you've wanted to work for your life. So it's a really good lesson there. You mentioned Too Tall. Do you want to talk to us about what Too Tall is and, what you are as a brand and what you've been up to?
Yeah, so Too Tall is me and Ian, who I mentioned, and Lexi Morgan, who's in charge of our operations and production. It's just a 3-person team. We scale to whatever size we need to, kind of like what you guys do in order to like bring in the right talent for any particular project. But we'd like to keep it small. We do mostly work in sports, as I said. We're a 2D animation studio, primarily. We're trying to make that big leap into more 3D stuff, but traditionally we're a 2D animation studio. And the thing that kind of makes us different than most of the other studios working in the sports space is that we work with more of a character animation background rather than a motion graphics background. So most of our work is figure-based or illustration-based, stuff like that. Those are all logistical answers. Were you asking about the philosophy of like, what does it mean to be too tall or
Yeah. I mean, like we obviously want to understand as a business what you're about. But yeah, like your philosophy, be great to understand that too. How you think about sports and sports creative.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, great. The way we think about what we do is our job is to stoke fandom. I mean, 100% all the time, no matter whether it is in the sports field or if we get hired on to do a branding job, anything like that. Like, we are big fans of taking enthusiasm and then slingshotting it with our content. We always try to like figure out like who is going to be taking this in. How do they feel about themselves? What's their source of pride? What do they love about their team or product, even if we're not doing something in sports? And what about that keeps them coming back year to year? What about their city and their team do they take pride in and identify with, and figuring out how to move that person right there? So like my passion has always been like kind of digging in a little bit deeper with some of that stuff, with brand messaging, basically. Like, how do we create some sort of a change, or how do we hook somebody in and really touch them in an interesting way? And that's the same whether it's kids media or branding or in sports. The thing that's great about sports, though, is when you're doing work in branding, you're trying to get somebody from possibly even like a 0 level of enthusiasm to a level that is high enough that they will reply to a call to action. In sports, you're starting off with people who are already at like a 9 in their enthusiasm, and you're just trying to like build that even bigger. So you've got so much more to work with if you have that level of enthusiasm and you're just trying to like turn that base level enthusiasm into a big bonfire. So I guess philosophically, the way I think about it is everything in terms of fandom. Enthusiasm is the most important currency that you have as a communicator. How do you grab that and harness it? How do you grab that in a way that's meaningful to people and have people associate their own pride, their own enthusiasm, their own love for things that are important to them, and turn it into a new direction, like add an extra verse to the story that they're already telling themselves about themselves, their team and their life and all of that stuff. So I guess philosophically, that's kind of where I come at things. I don't know if that's like a too tall thing, but it's something I think about.
I love slingshotting your enthusiasm. That you guys should certainly have that like printed on a tee or a bit of merchandise. I love that.
Yeah, we'll have to trademark that one.
Yeah, definitely will. Get in before we do.
Hey, Greg, I'm keen to understand a little bit more about, the actual outputs of your work, like break down the styles. Is it purely social pieces, commercial, brand promos, comics? Are you able to elaborate on that a little bit further?
It's a variety. When we first got into sports, most of the work we were doing was in social media, kind of snackable content for that. As we've progressed and kind of gotten deeper and more entrenched in the world of sports, these days we do mostly stuff that's going to be shown on video displays in arena or broadcast stuff, commercials, things like that. I think that the social media was kind of a proving ground for us to like play around with styles and do stuff like that and show that what we could do. And then we've kind of slowly leveled up to those bigger screens, those bigger audiences over time. We still do some social media stuff. We still do illustration from time to time. We just did for instance, the Denver Broncos, their in-stadium animation that they run before each game. We didn't actually do the animation on, but they hired us to do the illustrations for it. And then their internal team took that and they did the animation from there. So we still do illustration work as well. It's kind of whatever comes out in that sounds interesting to us and vibes with us, we'll generally go down that lane with somebody.
Yeah, nice. And you mentioned, you came across from kids media to sports purely for the, budget or money purposes. What were budgets like in the sports world? Because some would argue that a lot of sports brands don't have budget either.
Yeah, and they'd be right. But I guess if you can imagine, take that and cut it in half, and that's kids media. So I guess it seemed from where we were, the budgets here are a lot better. They are, I'm sure you guys have seen this too, but they're all over the map. Like you never know if somebody comes to you with something, if they've got $100,000 to do it, or they've got $5,000 to do it, or they've got $250, they might be asking for the exact same thing. So it's all over the map. But we've been trying to do more of this is our budget. And then if it's too much for somebody when they first come to us, and they have to walk and they have to go find somebody else or not do it, we hope that they'll kind of come back. So part of like what we need to do with people, especially since they haven't always done what we do, people don't know what the budgets are like for the kind of thing that we do, is a little bit of education around that. Because I think sometimes the reason that some people have $100,000 and some people have 5,000 is just they just don't know. They don't know how to budget this specific thing right here. So we're trying to like hold out for those teams or those leagues or anything like that have enough of a stake in what they're doing that they have a budget to do it well. And we find that, when somebody's doing like a social media snackable thing, it's pretty low stakes. And so it's pretty low budget. But if it's something that's like a big tent pole, or if it's something where a league or a team is trying to get into a new area of fandom, like an internal initiative, like there might be more spend there. So we're kind of trying to make our way to those more pivotal pieces where people can afford to pay us to do like the level of work we'd like to be doing.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting point and something, we struggle with sometimes in terms of, when we speak with clients, we'll ask what the budget is for the purpose of working out the level of detail that's required, what they actually want. And then they'll come back to us and say, oh, just tell us what the cost is. But there's a reason we're asking what the budget is. So we can work with, either the right creatives or, work on the right execution for what they want for the money that they're sort of got.
It's a weird dance, isn't it? Like I still don't think I'm any better at it than I was 10 years ago. It's kind of like no one wants to show their thing first, but both people have information the other person really needs to make their initial offer. So I don't know. How do you guys do that dance? Any advice?
I don't think we've nailed it either. Our biggest piece is trying to offer, like, I guess, tiers of service or levels of quality. So try and showcase, 3 different levels and with visuals to kind of reflect what those levels look like. Often that helps in someone being able to understand, okay, I understand if I'm going to go to the top tier, how that's really elevated from the first tier. So that definitely helps. I think it's just a constant education piece. You're always having to educate the client or the client's decision maker, whether it be their boss or someone higher up that is ultimately signing off the budget. So we just try and keep it simple, keep it to the tiers, and whoever we're working with, whether we're trying to get additional work from them or we're working on a project with them, is to just kind of constantly educate them on how long it takes, what kind of resources are required, how we work with different creatives, how scarce their talent is. So for us, I think we're always just focused on how can we be better educators.
Yeah, that makes sense. We've definitely found that like the projects that go sideways are often the ones where we under communicated. Like we didn't put in the extra effort to like make sure everybody knew all the things that the client knew all of the parameters, all of the contingencies, the stuff like that. So
yeah,
the tier thing is a good idea. We do that sometimes, and then we get lazy sometimes. But when we've done it, it helps a ton.
Yeah, we've definitely found it to be a useful tool for us. Let's talk about. I want to hear from you about some of your latest projects. But before we do, you mentioned projects going sideways, and I feel like anytime you have like podcasts or content out there, it's always like the best content. It's always like your sexy content that went really well, projects that looked like seamless from start to end. But do you have any examples of like where a project hasn't gone well? How have you handled it? What was the outcome after everything was said and done?
We have had some where we undercommunicated to the client, undercommunicated to the people working for us, and we got lazy in setting things up and didn't necessarily set up the right people for the right kind of success. And, a couple of the things that we have learned from some of those projects is when we're bringing people in from the outside, we know our internal capabilities really well. But when we're vetting new contractors, don't put the new contractor right front and center and give them all of the responsibility without having moved them up through the system kind of slowly. It's not fair to anybody to do that, especially if they're trying something new. Like what we really need to do is when we're bringing up people into our system, like bring them up in a small way with a smaller piece of a project, gain trust, get an idea of their communication, their skills, and their real strengths. And then when something comes along and you're like, oh, that's a perfect spot to put, X contractor. We've done that a couple of times, and we've just put the wrong person in the wrong place because we hadn't spent enough time vetting them, and then we've had to kind of dig our way out of it. Now, ideally, the client never sees this because, we may take a loss to kind of dig our way out, but we wanted them to always be happy. Yeah. Sometimes, as you guys well know, sports timelines are really tight, and sometimes you don't have that extra couple of days to kind of fix something. And if something like that happens, and we know that we haven't done our best work, we always have a debrief with the client, and we'll talk it through. We'll talk through what went well, what went poorly, did it meet expectations, and all that stuff. And sometimes what we'll find, if we don't volunteer any information about how chaotic it was internally, they'll be like, that was seamless. That was amazing. I can't believe how easy that was. And we just, say, okay, great. That's good. We're not going to tell you how the sausage is made.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. And how are we kind of get a mixed bag in the clients that we work with in terms of like those debrief sessions, and I guess how open they are to sharing their feelings towards how things went. How do you find debriefing sessions with your clients? Are they traditionally, quite an open discussion? Are people pretty transparent, or is it a lot of just like, yeah, it was good, and you just kind of move on?
It's mostly the latter. And I'm a big fan of brutal honesty when I can get it, just because I think it saves a lot of time and it helps us get better at what we do. So I actually would love to know more about what we could do better. But generally, when we send stuff out and we have like a form to send out and stuff to people, generally it's mostly platitudes. But I also definitely value the, if somebody didn't have a great experience, I want to make sure no one else has that with us. Have you guys had any luck with kind of getting valuable criticism, like of things that didn't quite go well with clients?
Yeah, definitely. We've actually like recently had a few that we've kind of from a project perspective worked through, where we haven't quite got it right in the initial phases, and we've been able to take on that feedback and to be fair, creative is so subjective. So sometimes you'll never get it 100%, which is a challenge. Like that's a challenge in itself to put a lot of effort into something and not get it to the client's expectations. But ultimately, like we know we're never going to be 100% successful. We're never going to 100% nail the brief because it is so subjective. But all we can do is make sure we're putting in the processes in place to take on that feedback, whether it's during the process or post that process, to get us as close to that 100% success rate as we possibly can.
Yeah, we've tried to put a system in place where there are enough checks and balances inside the process where by the time they see the finished product, there should be no surprises. We don't do storyboards. We only do animatics. And that's been a huge, huge thing for us, because I feel like if you put storyboards in front of a client, unless they have a really good idea, if they have a lot of experience moving something that's still into time space in their head, that it's really hard to see if something's going to work until you see it in motion. Yeah. And so I can only create at my best if I can see how something's going to flow. So I always do animatics. I try and get all the transitions basically sketched in there, try and get music, even trying to get sound effects in early if I can, because I want to show the client something that will be basically the same feeling as the final, but just really sketchy. And then they can pull that apart and they can say, this isn't vibing right for me. Like this part's too slow, stuff like that. We're in a time-based medium, and not giving the client the time dimension until the very final deliverable feels like it would really leverage us a lot, to a final product that's A, really hard to fix at that point, and B, might disappoint the client. So I think animatics have helped. We do animatic in a style sample or several style samples early on, and have a round of revisions at that stage. And that's where the honesty comes out. And that's where if they're like, this isn't right, then we can redo it. We can do it over and over again. And we're not doing the entire thing over and over again. We're just doing those two things. But basically, we're covering everything. Every judgment call is covered in those two things. The flow, the composition, the timing, and the aesthetic are all covered there. So by the time they get the final, we usually don't have a whole lot of revisions once they get the final. It happens sometimes, but it's usually there's no surprises.
Yeah, right. What's for those that don't know what an animatic is, are you able to describe the difference between that and a storyboard?
Yeah, sorry, I should have led with that. So basically, an animatic is a moving storyboard. It's a sketchy version of the final animation that's there to show flow, composition, and timing. So everything, if there's text on the screen, all that will be there, transitions, things like that. But it might even be as simple as stick figures or sketches, things like that. But it's basically a moving storyboard where all of the creative decisions are made in a sketchy way, so they're easy to tweak at that stage.
Are we able to delve further into that process of creating content? A lot of people might just think you sketch and draw something up and animate it straight away, but there's a lot more that goes into the process of ideation, the concepts, the sketching, the refining. It's just not like an idea comes to mind and you just draw it straight up and off you go. There's so many layers, especially to your work, that goes into the final product. Yeah, and
there's tons of layers. I mean, as I'm sure you guys know, like for every single team, what they're trying to do, what their brand guidebook is like, what their audience is like, where they are in their process. Like, are they having a losing season? Are they having a winning season? Where is everybody feeling? How is everybody feeling about the team? Like all these little things you can, like this University of Virginia one we just did, there were kind of like 5 big have-tos that we had to bake in there. And they're great for us to know early on because that gives us walls to bounce up against. But it's also makes it completely unique from any other project because they had some very specific changes they were trying to make with what they were doing. And so it was a completely different thing than any other client we've ever had. It's just it's a whole different goal that we had in mind.
Are you able to share a little bit about that process with the University of Virginia? I think the first piece was released maybe a week or so ago that we saw. I think it's like a 5 or a 6-part series. Can you talk a bit about that and the creative process and what it's been like working with them?
Yeah, I can. They've been awesome. So basically, it's every home game, we're going to have a different variation of this core home opener video. And it's 50 seconds long, and 40 seconds of it is boilerplate, and then 10 seconds of it is specific to the team that's visiting for each home game. So it's basically, it's about their Cavalier mascot. And this is the video that leads up to the Cavalier on horseback riding out into the stadium right before a game with pyrotechnics and all that stuff. So it's a hype video, but it also had a few other things that it had to hold. Like, one of the main things early on that we talked about was they've got a Cavalier mascot that's a dude with a mustache, and he's kind of jolly, and he's been their mascot for a long time. The person who rides the horse out into the arena is a woman. Her name is Julie. She rides it out. So they're like, we've actually got 2 Cavaliers that the fans love and both like to see and both see as the Cavalier. So we want you to make a video about our Cavalier, but it can't look like, you can't be able to see quite what he looks like, because we can't have something that looks like the old school guy, and we can't have it be exactly about Julie. So that was kind of one thing we had to do. We had to kind of like figure out how to reinvent this Cavalier. The other thing we had to do was, there's a few other things, like the identity of the University of Virginia is very traditionalist. It's very honor based. It's very honor, hard work, blue collar. It's got a very old school kind of Southern honor to it as part of its identity. So we needed to serve that goal right there and make it look like it was made for the University of Virginia. We also had to kind of hype everyone up. At the same time as we're telling this story, we had to make this a hype piece so that by the time people got to Julie riding out, everyone was super stoked. And the other thing it had to do is we had to make it so that it was adaptable to all 6 teams that were coming. So those were kind of our pillars. I think there's one more, but I can't remember what it is. But those were kind of the things we had to work with, and sorting through them was a really deliberate process at the beginning. We wanted to make sure we went through a lot of style samples to figure out what our Cavalier looks like. And what we ended up doing is we were like, well, we can't do Julie and we can't do the mascot. But what we can do is we can do this third Cavalier that's almost like the spirit of the Cavalier, like the original Cavalier, the specter that comes out at night and fights off all of the mascots trying to invade Virginia. It's faceless. It's primeval. It's kind of from an ancient time. And the Virginia guys wrote up this cool little epic poem to go with them. And then we created this character that has no face, just eyes and a sword and a hat. And from there, things really fell into place. We wanted to make sure that we served Julie. And we started off with kind of the origin story at the beginning, slow rolled it a little bit. And then we had it ramp up once our Cavalier got onto a horse to this moment where the enemy mascot shows up. And it's like, you take the spider, you guys saw the spider one. It's a big, like gnarly spider. We were working with this great artist, Mike Lee Graham, who does horror animation and horror illustration, because we really wanted to get this kind of like dark horror kind of look to these mascots as they came around. So the spider is super grotesque and really like Hellboy, Mike Mignola type of like noir look to it. Same thing with the Terrapin that just came out this weekend. The Terrapin is more like a Godzilla-like creature. He rises up out of the sea. Oh yeah, the fifth thing was we have to make sure it is inclusive of all of Virginia. So this had a lot of loads on it. So we had to get the Blue Ridge Mountains. We had to get the farmlands. We had to get Virginia Beach. We had to get campus. We had to get kind of all the identities of Virginia in this. So we worked that in there by having each one of these mascots come on and attack a different part of Virginia. So the spider comes and he attacks campus. The Terrapin rises up out of the sea and attacks Virginia Beach. And we've got 4 more that are going to attack different locations. That's kind of a very long-winded what I just threw out at you guys, but it kind of pulls apart like some of the pillars that we had to serve, and then some of the decision processes that those led us to. It wasn't just kind of like hey, make a cool Cavalier and it'll hype up the fans. It really had to do a lot of things. And that's where it becomes fun and interesting for me, is like figuring out how to get this machine to do something that is new for the fans and also serve all the masters it has to with branding and messaging and all that stuff.
It's quite a complex process when you break it down like that.
It is. I'm sorry I talk too much, but like,
no, it's great to get that understanding. And I think for brands or clients who are kind of briefing that work, for them to kind of understand the process that the creatives need to go through when they're receiving those briefs that, you know, do have 4 or 5 different requirements as part of it. I think it's great to have that breakdown and you know, nearly empathy for the process that needs to be taken from the creative side of things. So I think that was a great breakdown. One thing that we love is like when we see our stuff out in the wild, you know, whether it's on social or whether it's in stadium. Do you get the opportunity to see your stuff out there in the wild, like for the University of Virginia stuff? You know, are you getting content shared with you of like in stadium, how it kind of comes to life?
We've seen it on social media. People will film it and post it, and it seems like it's going over well. People are cheering at all the right moments and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I'd love to get down there. It's about a 6.5 hour drive, and I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to make it, but I would love to get down there and see it because I'm trying to think if I've ever even seen one of ours on the big screen. We've done, you know, over a dozen of these things that are being shown on the big screen. I don't think I've ever actually been there live to see it, which is kind of ridiculous. I got to get out more often, I suppose.
Yeah. You're spending too much time doing the actual work.
Yeah. It's hard to get away sometimes. Do you guys find that you're able to go out and see your work in the wild as much as you'd like?
No, not really.
Yeah.
Probably very similar. Yeah, we get content shared with us, whether it's photos or videos of the big screen or at an event, whatever it is, or obviously on social we see it. But yeah, we're a little bit like you. We don't get to get out and see it in the flesh as much as we'd like to. Yeah,
it's a shame too, because I mean, it often comes with like, you know, if a client's happy, they'll give you free tickets to come down and see it. But it's kind of like, I wish I could make it, because usually they're really far away. I mean, you get like Australia is very large too. The US is very large. Things are really far away, and you know, getting away for a few days just to see one 60-second video is tricky sometimes.
Yeah, well, how do you actually find that collaborative approach with your clients? You know, not just Virginia, but all of them. Is it a case of them coming to you with all these ideas, or 50-50? Are you going to them with these concepts and saying, "Hey, this would be really cool. What do you think?" How's that split sort of work with you guys?
It's probably about 50-50. Sometimes clients come and they're like, we want this specific thing. Actually, it might be like 60-40. I guess we're splitting hairs, but I think more often they come to us, even if they come to us with something, they'll come to us with kind of a seed. You know, they're like, we've been thinking about this kind of thing. What do you think? And then we start from there. Sometimes people will be like, I've got a script. I've got this thing. I need somebody to execute it. And we do that too. And then we'll put on our production hats. But often people will come to us with a seed. For Virginia, they came to us with a completely different video from our portfolio that looks nothing like the thing that we ended up with. But in talking with them, we all kind of came around to the thing we ended up making. Same thing with like the Chiefs one we had made a few years before. It was, you know, they came to us and they knew they wanted to do the night before Christmas, before their Christmas Eve game against my Seahawks. But that's all they had really thought about. And we, you know, had conversations over the next month and a half about, you know, what does this thing need to be? What does it need to look like? What does it need to feel like? How do we serve the fans properly with this thing? And we ended up with something that was vastly different from where they started, which was something cuter, you know, a Christmas night before Christmas with maybe, you know, their players as little characters, to something that was a lot darker and more hip hop based and more, I hate the word edgy, but more edgy, more crude, more dark. And I love that kind of that process where you break it down and you say, in this venue for this crowd, they're watching this. This is the place that they're in. Does this add or does this subtract from where they're already at? And this is what I'm talking about. Like the enthusiasm. That's not a word. Enthusiasm is at a 9. Like for the Chiefs one, and I'll be brief. The Chiefs were the best team in the NFL. It was Christmas Eve. It was going to be played in stadium to a hyped crowd. And I just thought, and we all agreed, that the worst thing you could do at that point was just be silly and cute, because you're squandering this currency, this enthusiasm, the enthusiasm you have in that auditorium or in Arrowhead Stadium. Like, you can't squander that. You've got to add to it. You've got to add Christmas on top of the thing that they already have, instead of throwing Christmas in there in a silly way that they'd be like, their enthusiasm would be like, oh, I need to come down here to enjoy a cute Christmas thing. And then they have to get back up to it. So we wanted to really turn it into a hype video that laid Christmas on top of that thing that was already there, and hopefully got them hyped up even more. It didn't hurt that Tech Nine, who did the version of Night Before Christmas, was there standing underneath the Jumbotron, singing along with it at the same time. But like that atmosphere felt a lot better than something cute and quaint, which is what we easily could have done. And most people honestly do around Christmas. You know, maybe people don't know that there's other options. And so exploring those other options are always fun.
And with those types of clients, like how many, I guess, monetizing these pieces of content, you know, pushing them out as branded pieces, working with partners versus just creating content to engage their audiences? We haven't really done a whole lot of that sort of thing that's monetized. Most of this stuff that we do is purely for a team to fan relationship, or a communication, or a league to fans kind of thing. Like, you know, this game is going to happen. Let's get you hyped for this thing. Haven't done the monetization thing too much. Have you guys found that you are doing a lot of content that your clients are hoping to monetize? Yes and no. I think for the bigger pieces, it can be hard, especially if we're pitching the idea and it's going to cost, you know, X amount of dollars. They're keen to do it, but they need the money, so they might go out to a partner and try and sell it in. So yeah, it's a bit of a juggling act, and it just depends on the client and their appetite for posting it as a fun piece of content for fans versus trying to make money or, you know, some sort of ROI off it. Yeah,
the ROI thing is really tricky in sports because it's so unquantifiable. It's very fuzzy. Yeah. Unless it's for eyeballs or unless it's for monetization. It's one of those things that you can't study it as much as maybe one would like.
Yeah, I think if you went back probably across all of the Art of the Game podcasts, we've spoken to all of our guests about this in some way, shape or form, and no one's been able to get a perfect answer, because I don't think there is a perfect answer. As you mentioned, there's something very unquantifiable about certain elements of creative. For our pieces, our thing is always around, especially around the commercial conversation of like, you know, are we bringing a partner on board for this, or can we bring a partner on board for this to kind of fund it? It's always got to go back to, though, we need to create really good content first. We can't create this content in a kind of like a vacuum of being commercial content, because we know that that's not going to perform. Like we always have to kind of go back to the audience, and it goes back to your point, Greg, around like you really need to read the room of what the content is going to do and what role it's going to play in that moment before that actually even happens. So it's the point there for us is whether it's commercial or whether it's just to engage the audience, it has to be for that audience first and foremost.
It feels like the work that connects best is when you can just like surprise someone a little bit. You know, something that just like they haven't seen before. And the stuff that we've done that kind of has fallen flat is the stuff where people saw it and they were like, yeah, that works. That comes in and out of my head really fast. But like, you know, figuring out how to surprise people a little bit, surprise them, delight them, you know, in some small way is the goal of kind of going through that process. but still it's very fuzzy. And we don't do like, I would say that the Neil Horowitz episode is a great one. And I had a great conversation with him about 3 weeks ago. And that guy is a trip. But the amount of strategy that I wanted to bottle coming out of that guy was just insane. Because one of the things that I'm a creative. I'm not actually a very good businessman. I'm not a very good at making relationships, bringing in sponsors, things like that. But the amount of things that I got out of that conversation, of things that we could and should be doing, it sounds like you guys are doing a lot of them, as far as like you're bringing in third parties to make things happen, stuff like that we actually haven't been doing. It made me realize that like there's a huge piece of this that is missing unless you have the ability to strategize about how to get the thing done and get that ROI for people. Because sometimes, like if you bring in a sponsor, there is an ROI. If you can bring in a sponsor and do something with a team as well, that sponsor gets an ROI out of it. We haven't traditionally done that. And I really feel like we could really do a lot more if we thought about that more often.
Yeah, I'm like you, Greg. I'm more a creative and just like creating cool stuff. And Ryan's the businessman with the commercial lens.
It's hugely important, incredibly important. It's a muscle I don't have. But,
yeah. I mean, I always find it funny that, sports executives will question the ROI of social media content, but never think twice over, spending thousands of dollars on billboards or TV ads. It's always the social piece of content that they'll raise an eyebrow over.
Yeah. What's up with that? It's strange. Is it because it's new? Is it because those people are like my age instead of like they didn't grow up with social media and they're like, what is this?
I think so. And I think that comes back to that education piece. They don't really know any better. They just think, because they're on Facebook and Instagram that, they just don't see the value of it. And that's up to us to try and elaborate on the importance of social media content and digital content.
Yeah, I think it's like the biggest thing is everything's just dumped into the digital bucket now. It's like, well, it's just digital, so we should be able to measure it. And if we can't measure it, then it's not worthwhile. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I think it's going to be one of those challenges that we'll always have. I feel like we've talked about a few different like tips and deep diving into some experiences and how we've kind of got around those. Any like words of advice, Greg, for young creatives or creatives moving into the sporting space, things that they should focus on or prioritize?
I would say, we don't need to talk about AI, but like I would say there's something about the impending doom of AI that has given me some time to think about creativity and about what the role of creatives needs to be. It's a tough industry to get into. You're going to work really hard. You're not going to get paid a ton initially anyway. And it's going to get harder with AI because some of that stuff is probably some of those jobs are probably going to go away. So it's even more important that everybody has in mind the fact that the work needs to not just be as good as what's out there, but it needs to be better, constantly, like I was saying, surprising people. I do think I thought this like the day after I saw Sora, I was like, okay, my goal for what I as a creative person needs to do has changed kind of overnight. Creatives need to figure out, in a world where anything can be created with a prompt in 10 seconds, how do we continue to surprise people? How do we continue to touch people? That question right there is a question that everybody should just be asking themselves. They should have before AI because it was important there as well. But constantly be asking yourself that question. Like how can I take this somewhere that can't be quantified and digitized by a machine or overseas or by somebody who hasn't spent a lot of time thinking about this sort of stuff. So I think be good at your craft, all that stuff, be good at storytelling, but also just never be satisfied with now I'm as good as all these other people doing this one thing. I can join this pack. Joining the pack is fine. You need to get in front of the pack before people will notice you. You want to do something that no one has seen in this context before. We have a lot of folks who come to us of different levels of talent saying, hey, we'd love to be a contractor with you guys. The ones that I mark as what I want to work with is somebody who I look at and I'm like, this guy's way better than me at one thing, or this woman is way better at me at one thing. They stand out. The people who are like, I can do work that's as good as yours. They're talented because I'm proud of our work. But if they don't push us forward, it's hard to figure out how they'll really move us forward. I hope that all makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I'd love to cut up that 2 minutes with some like high impact music. I feel like there's like a really cool motivational piece in there that you could just put your headphones on, listen to that every day when you wake up.
Okay. Awesome. Well, all right. Excellent.
That's
I
great.
look forward to hearing it, man.
In terms of like the US market and what you're seeing globally as well, any particular organizations in the sporting world that you're like, yeah, they get it. Like they're really pushing the boundaries. They're slingshotting their fans' enthusiasm.
Yeah, I mean I got to come back to the Chiefs. Like they're one of my favorite clients we've ever worked with. Because they're just the nicest people, but we've only worked with them once, and that is actually very important because what I like about them is they haven't gone back to the well. Every piece that they put out, they're constantly trying something new with their fans and giving their fans something interesting and different. They're seeking all the time. They're not resting on their laurels. They're incredibly famous. They've got Taylor Swift coming to every game, Travis Kelce, all that stuff, the best quarterback in the world. But the creative team isn't resting on like that stuff. They're doing something interesting and new every time. Sometimes they go funny. Sometimes they go touching. They go to all these different areas with their creative. And I think that's really important for keeping it vibrant, not getting lazy like that. There's some other groups that I find their journey really interesting. Like NFL right now is working really hard to get overseas. They've got this really big initiative to do that, and it's causing them to innovate in some really interesting ways, really going after European audiences, really pushing hard to get flag football in the Olympics, because flag football, if people start playing it in Europe to become an Olympic sport or all over the world, that just grows homegrown cells of like NFL fans. They're doing a similar thing with bringing kids up into the sport in a way that I haven't seen other sports doing it, with what they're doing with Nickelodeon, what they're doing with Toy Story at ESPN. Like they are seeking new audiences, and they're meeting those new audiences where that audience is. And I think that's really smart. So they've done a great job. I'll do one more. NASCAR's been I'm fascinated by NASCAR. We've worked with them a couple of times, but they have a demographic that they've had for a really long time. And they have a real initiative to kind of broaden that out of kind of a southeastern United States cultural thing into like, can we bring in more people from different parts of the country, different parts of the world, and innovating in ways that will try to get them out of that one very deep kind of, I don't want to say rut. It's not a rut, but it's a groove. They have a groove, and they're trying to deepen it, and they're doing so in interesting strategic ways. We'll see if it works with that. I think that it's made some inroads, but that one's a tough ship to move. So it'll take a couple of years.
Yeah, man, that's three really great examples there. I think for me, the Chiefs, it's a really great metaphor for how their team performs on the field is how their team performs, in the back of house. They're doing all of the same things. They're adapting. They're not kind of resting on their laurels. They're not getting complacent. So a really good comparison there. The NFL, shout out to the NFL Australia New Zealand crew. They're doing some great work down under here as well, growing the game, flag football, and growing the professional interest in the game as well. They're really focusing on that international expansion and building that audience base. And then NASCAR, really interesting as well, around kind of shifting gears for them, pardon the pun, around who their traditional audience is and how they're bringing in new audiences as well. So mate, they're really three great examples. So thanks for sharing those. I guess before we finish up, anything that you're excited to see or that you're starting to see out in the sports creative space? In Australia, we usually lag a little bit behind. So anything that's happening over there in the States at the moment that you're like, this could really take off and either fans should be excited by it or creatives should be excited by it?
That's a good question. I don't know if it's a mass trend, but we have seen a lot more teams in this last year ready to do something fun instead of always something badass, always something hype. More teams coming to us and us saying, "Hey, let's amp this thing up. Let's make it really gritty. Let's make it." And they're like, "Actually, can we just make this like something fun?" And I think that there's like a maturity to that when you get to a point where you're like, you know the fans well enough that you're like, okay, we can actually give them something fun and it won't dilute this thing. We've been seeing a lot more of that in this last year, just in our work, but I'm sure you guys have seen it too. There's seasons to everything. Like a certain style will be around for a year and then it'll dry up and then it'll go away and something else. So I don't know if that really is any kind of a broader thing. I think the Nickelodeon thing maybe has enabled it a little bit. Certainly with the stuff we've done on our social media, which is old school kind of Charlie Brownie look, like, people who want to just kind of have fun with the NBA players that they love and not be hype, but just be silly and fun. It's connected with people there. So I don't know what that says for what's coming over across the pond, the series of ponds, but I have noticed some of that lately.
It's been a great episode. I feel like we could just keep recording for the next 3 or 4 hours, but we don't want to eat into your dinner time. We appreciate your time and sharing your story, and you are very interesting and unique in what you do, and we appreciate you giving us your time and thank you for that. I think the three biggest things that I've taken out is slingshotting your enthusiasm. That's definitely number one. I think the second is be better than what's currently the best. I think that mindset it's unreal, and I'll make sure I get you that little motivational video once we've cut it up. And then the third is have more fun. Whether it's related to the content or whether it's just related to your craft. I think it's a really nice way to kind of end the podcast. So thanks for joining us, Greg.
For having me. I really appreciate you guys taking the time too. And I don't know, I would love to interview you guys back and find out about all of your experiences as well. But I guess I get that in little pieces over your podcast. So I'll keep listening.
Love that. Thank you, mate. And appreciate you joining us.
Thanks a lot. Y'all have a great one.
You too, Greg. Cheers, mate.